I'm Larry Fedoruk, and welcome to another episode of my podcast, I Was 8. A weekly series, a personal journal of crazy times growing up in a small prairie town. Some of the names have been changed, but these stories happened as told. And this is the first story of Season 2. If you're new to my podcast, you've got a lot of great stories to catch up on, in my opinion. A complete list of how to get this podcast, along with my email, comes up at the end of the episode. But right now, let's move on with I Was 8, Season 2.
Chapter 1, Fear the Dead.
By the time I was 8, I thought I had a pretty good handle on life and death. After all, I had already lost 2 dogs, 1 uncle, 1 aunt. They weren't really my uncle and aunt, by the way, just old cousins of my grandparents. And you had to call them something, so I called them Uncle and Aunt. As a matter of fact, I think I called her Auntie Grandma, and he was Uncle Ivan. They went within a week of each other. I can't remember who went first, and when I asked, I was told first didn't matter. Larry, this is not a race. When in fact, it really is. When Auntie Grandma died, I remember asking if my real Uncle Joe, the good one, would be dragging her behind the tractor to be buried in a neighboring field. Mom said no, he only does that with farm dogs. Well, how does it work with people? I found out at the funerals. Yeah, so life and death, what's so complicated? I'm 8 years old, I'm alive, they are not. That's called dead. End of story. Well, there was this one little hurdle I couldn't quite clear. We were Catholic, so the concept of heaven and hell were being drilled into me. Both implied that once you were dead, there was this other life, and it all hinged on how you lived this one. Good, heaven. Bad, hell. Okay, got that, simple enough. I choose heaven. But you don't actually choose per se. God and the devil decide. God is everywhere, but it helps if you go to his house and ask for help directly. The devil, meanwhile, shows up here and there and says stuff like, go ahead, just take that candy from the drugstore. You deserve it. Well, the rules are all in a book. However, as an astute consumer of both TV and comic books, I had become aware of yet another group of dead people. They didn't really go to heaven or hell. They just hung around Earth and had skills like being invisible, walking through walls, and haunting. That didn't sound too bad. I could do that. So death and ghosts were just like when that idiot Philip moved to the city. I didn't see him anymore, but I knew he was out there somewhere. I also did have some slight confusion on the Holy Ghost. Father, Son, Holy Ghost, so Father, Son, God, Jesus. But this other guy, the hanger-on, if he was a ghost, albeit holy, why did he get to hang out up there in heaven? When all the other ghosts, including and especially Casper, very nice, very friendly, was a ghost stuck here down on Earth in comic books. Yeah, that was a tough one. Couldn't even find Casper in the Bible. I guess what I'm saying is that I didn't really fear death or the dead. I mean, I didn't want to die soon, but if I did, there apparently were a lot of options. Chances are I'd see my dogs again, and this time I'd have 2 of them. I'd been to funerals, Auntie Grandma, Uncle Ivan. They closed the box, they threw them in the ground. But hey, what did they care? They were dead. Auntie Grandma seemed peaceful and asleep. Uncle Ivan looked a little grumpy, but I was sure he'd cheer up eventually. By the way, our family had an odd tradition at funerals. They took pictures. flash photography when necessary of the deceased, right there in the casket in the church. In every house of people we knew, where there was a photo album with a section dedicated to one person, there'd be a series of shots. Baby pics, first communion, school pictures, wedding photos, a few anniversaries and Christmases, and bam, right there in the casket. There's your life. I always wondered if all those people in heaven gathered round and said, "Oh, I hate all those pictures of me when I'm dead. My eyes are always closed." Heaven up in the sky, I'd take an airplane one day and see it, and hell way down below in the earth. I actually didn't want to go there. As a matter of fact, I stopped going into our cellar for a few months, fearing that it was closer to hell down there. "Larry, why don't you go down to the cellar, bring up a jar of peaches, and we'll have them later for dessert?" "No thanks, Mom, I'm good." As an 8-year-old, you know what the worst thing about death was? No fun allowed. Someone had just died, so no TV, no comic books, no games, no laughing. It would be disrespectful. We are in a period of mourning. Could I take my ball glove and go out and mourn with my friends at the schoolyard? No. It's a solemn period, and it usually lasted about 10 days to 2 weeks from news of the passing through to a few days after the service at the graveyard. When my parents talked of some relative sick in the hospital, they would say, "I hope he pulls through." And I was like, "Yeah, me too. I want to be able to ride my bike." Very solemn, very quiet, very mournful. It was like this at Easter, too. I mean, think about it. The ultimate death, the ultimate funeral. And Jesus died every year. So at this point, I think you'd agree that I had a pretty good grasp on everything. I mean, all important issues facing an 8-year-old, like life and death, and heaven and hell, and ghosts. I felt mostly confident about it all. I'll tell you when this all changed. It was the death of a very old woman named Isolde, or possibly Zoya. Can't remember. The rare times I came in contact with her, I just called her Baba. I was frightened of her. She was not technically my Baba. She was my evil Uncle Joe's mother. Evil Uncle Joe had married into my dad's side of the family, so really she was no relation. And I know you're not supposed to speak ill of the dead, but the times I had to talk to her, I knew why that Uncle Joe had grown up evil. I knew where he got it from. Nevertheless, mournful period begins. TV off, please. We would attend the funeral and the prayer services the night before. Now, on the prairies back in the day, prayer services often worked like this. They would be held in the main house on the homestead out on the farm, relatives and guests. The priest held a brief liturgy, and then sandwiches and coffee. Or in the case of my dad's family, whiskey and card games. Mom found this all very disrespectful, but my dad's attitude was more like, "Hey, we're all here. We all know we want to play cards. Decks of cards are in the house. She would have wanted it this way. It's one game, a couple of games, so what?" Same philosophy on the whiskey. One drink, couple of drinks, few drinks, whatever. And if you look closely, you could see the concept of time slowly seeping out through the cracks in the windows and doors. Let me also explain that on my mom's side of the family, I was one of the older kids. So at those gatherings, I pretty much ruled. A benevolent dictator. My people loved me. On my father's side, of all the cousins, I was the runt. They were bullies. The idea on those days was survival. So there we were out on evil Uncle Joe's farm at the prayer services for Zelda, Zoya, something. Listen, I don't mean this badly, but I was just a kid, and I thought she was a witch. The nose, the warts, the black shawl, the crooked stick, missing teeth. She was quite frightening alive, and in death did not look peaceful at all. And I thought Uncle Ivan looked a little grumpy. At the prayers, she looked like she was ready to jump out of the coffin and kick some arse, as my dad would say. After the priest was done, they wheeled the casket into a far bedroom down the hall, and my dad's family started doing shots and shuffling up the deal. I tried to lay low and hang around my folks, but even Mom at one point was like, "Stop clinging. Go play with your cousins." Yeah, the cousins. 4 boys, all older than me, like 12 or almost 13. 2 of them were as tall as my dad. I found them all outside around the corner trying to smoke a cigarette. Now, they did ask me if I wanted some. I said no, I was trying to cut down. They said if I told anyone about the cigarette, they would beat me up. I took them at their word. Finally, my cousin who lived there, Evil Joe Jr., said, let's all go to his room and play a game of cards ourselves. Now, I couldn't play. I was the 5th wheel, but I would be allowed to watch. As we made our way down the hall to his room, I remember they were giggling and snickering, a lot like they were sharing a private joke. We were tiptoeing, at least I was, past the room where the body was. Suddenly, they stopped, grabbed me, flung open the door, and threw me into that room. I hit the floor and I rolled right under the casket. They closed the door and held on tight on the other side, so that when I ran in horror to get out, they wouldn't let me. I was screaming, "Let me out! Let me out!" They wouldn't budge, and I could hear them laughing. Maniacally, I might add. I paused for a moment to see if maybe there was another way out of the room. I would have jumped out a window, I think, at this point. And there was just enough moonlight coming into the room that I could make out the casket. At this point, I swear Zoya Zelda Isolde witch lady sat up in her coffin and reached a hand out toward me to try and grab me. At least, that's the way I remember it. "She's coming to get me," I screamed, but my cousins just laughed louder. I guess all this ruckus prompted one of my uncles to yell down the hall, "Hey, you kids, keep it down out there!" And the ever-popular threat, "Don't make me come over there!" At which point, the boys let go of the door and bolted into my cousin's room. I didn't even look behind me to see if the dead body was gaining on me. I just ran and found my mother, who saw that I was pale, frightened, sweaty, and weeping. "What's the matter?" she said. Nothing. I think I stubbed my toe, and it hurts." "You think you stubbed your toe?" She didn't believe me, but asked no follow-up questions. I said nothing of the events of that night. My cousins may have been bullies and evil, but you didn't tell. That was the code. Actually, because I kept my silence, I think they rarely picked on me again after that. Maybe I had earned their respect. More likely, they felt they couldn't top themselves with that dead body gag, so they didn't bother with me at all. From that moment on, I feared the dead. Not dying, but the dead. To this day, it takes everything I have to approach a coffin at a prayer service to pay my respects. Oh, I do it, but it takes me minutes to work up the courage, and then a few days to get over it afterward. Also, I've never watched a zombie movie. As well, I made a promise to myself from that day forward that when I'm dead, I'm not going to scare people. If I make it to heaven, it won't be an issue. If it's hell, I'll just have to tell Satan to find some other schlub to do his dirty work. What about all those guys in suits over there? Why don't you bug them? And if I get stuck on Earth as a ghost, well, I may not be the holiest, but I could certainly achieve Casper.
I Was 8 is a weekly series written, produced, and voiced by Larry Fedoruk. A new episode every Thursday. Share your stories with Larry, or if you like, share Larry's stories with a friend. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Larry Fedoruk, that's Fedoruk, can be reached at larryfedoruk37@gmail.com.